When we consider the people who left Oxford University Press and went on active service, I think there's an automatic assumption for us to think of barbed wire and the mud of the trenches, because of the almost indescribable carnage that happened on the Western Front. That is the popular impression of the whole war that we have inherited 100 years on. But it's not the truth. The war was far wider than that. It was fought on a great many fronts. And the experience of men from Oxford reflects that. Many of them joined the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry. And as a military unit, that was posted not to the Western Front, but to Greece, to Salonika. There were other people who joined up, who served in Egypt. Some did serve on the Western Front. Others ended up fighting against the Bolsheviks in Russia after the First Russian Revolution. So Oxford men were very, very widely scattered indeed. And it took a long time for them to come home. Again, we have a very popular impression that with the armistice in 1918, everything stopped and everybody began to come back to their jobs and their families. That isn't true. Because of the huge expanse of the conflict, some of the men from Oxford were still in active service in the early 1920s. So the war actually lasted, in practical terms, for far longer than we might imagine. On the other hand, some men did not stray very far from home. We have records of people who were posted to sentry duty in Oxfordshire. Some worked on naval intelligence or other naval work in Portsmouth. One man, as it were, stuck to his craft, and he was involved in printing the Versailles Treaty in Paris at the end of the war, the great treaty which signals a formal end to hostilities, but of course in the harshness of its terms against Germany really laid the foundations for World War II. And the experience of these men is something that we can only imagine. In these films we've been talking about how close the surrounding community of Jericho was to the press. Equally, it meant that people's experiences were far more limited than they are now. Yet, when one looks at the role of honour, the role of service of men who left the press, who went to war, some of their experiences were terrifying. They were out of any proportion with anything they might have experienced before. So, in one case, one man who had simply grown up in Jericho and been apprenticed to the press and known very little else in the way of life, within weeks of signing up, was on the Western Front performing amputations by candlelight as part of an ambulance corps. The war turns everything inside out and upside down, and after it, nothing was the same again.